Let us pray. Gracious God, we come again before you. We come grateful for your work in and through and among us. We ask that you again come here right now, in this time, in this place, that you touch us. For when we are touched by you, we are changed. Thank you. Amen. I was talking with a friend of mine who's an investment manager. Actually, he told me he's in the wealth management business. But he said, he was telling me about this rule of 72. And I didn't know anything about the rule of 72. And he said, well, the rule of 72 is a way to determine the number of years that it will take for an investment to double. So he said, if you have an investment and you invest it at 5%, you divide 72 by 5 and you end up with 14 and a half. So in 14 and a half years, that investment will double. And I was listening to my friend and I thought, 14 and a half years seems like a long time. Aren't there some ways that you can get that number shorter? And he said, oh yes. He said, there's lots of investments that you can choose that go up, the interest rate goes up. But he said, typically, when the interest rate goes up, those are much riskier investments. And he went on to tell me about venture capital, and he said, if you get the right venture capital, it'll double very, very quickly. But, he said, there's a high risk with the venture capital. And he said, at best, 1 out of 4, maybe 1 out of 5 of those ventures succeed. And the others all go bust. So you can invest in those, and if it goes well, you might double your money very quickly. But, he said, you also take quite the risk and in getting your money, not even the principal back. He said, because of the high risk that's involved in those ventures. And I was thinking of this conversation as we were reading and preparing for this parable of the talents this week. Matthew here is telling this story, this parable about the end of time. This is the third of 4 parables in a row, and the common theme in each of these parables is the return of the master or the bridegroom or the king, and then how it is that those who are waiting for this person spend their time. Matthew is clear. We don't know when this person will return in the parable, whoever that may be, but he believes it will be soon. So we call this the parable of the 5 talents, and to be clear, talent is simply a denomination of money. It's like a $20 bill. But a talent is a great deal of money. In fact, a talent is a kingly sum. A talent was worth about 20 years of wages for the average worker. So if the average wage in America is about $50,000 a year times 20, that comes up to $1 million. So in today's world, a talent would be something on the order of $1 million. I'm sure that during Jesus' life here on earth and the disciples, those first disciples' life on earth, they never saw a talent of money. So to say that these servants were given 5 talents or 2 talents or even 1 talent is to say that they were given millions of dollars. Now, remember that in telling parables, Jesus has a way of surprising people with the outcome of those parables. In fact, the hero or the good guy in many of his parables was often the scallywag or the rascal. And Jesus told parables that turned the world upside down. And many of his parables had a bit of a sting to them. We see that in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Those first listeners to that story were surprised, astonished probably, that a Samaritan could be a neighbor. Samaritans were heartily disliked by Jews. Jews considered Samaritans half-breeds. Samaritans didn't think that Jews worshiped God in the right temple. And at times there were riots between Jews and Samaritans because they didn't like each other. So in hearing this parable, the Samaritan was a very unlikely neighbor. It didn't seem right to those Jewish hearers of the story. But there's no upside down to this parable of the talents. At least not as we traditionally understand it. There's no sting to it. The story ends exactly as I would expect it to. We know the story. 2 slaves, one with 5, one with 2 talents, double their talents. The third slave buries his talent, and after this long absence, the master returns. The slaves come to settle accounts with him. The first slave says, "You gave me 5, I'm giving you back 10. The second slave comes up and says, "You gave me 2, I'm giving you back 4. The third slave comes up and says, "You gave me 1, I'm giving you 1 back." Nothing more, nothing less. And those first 2 slaves are commended and they're welcomed and they are told to enter into the joy of their master. The third slave, who returns the talent just as it was, is called worthless and banished. And when I first hear this story, this parable, I think it makes perfect sense to me. Those 2 slaves, number 1 and 2, they got what they deserved. They had it, they were making profit. And the third slave, he, for whatever reasons, didn't do anything with his money. He should have been banished. But if you listen to this story through the ears of the people of Jesus' day, they would have heard it very differently. Because we hear the story from a Western perspective, but those in Palestine would have heard it very differently. Those first hearers would have heard this story and they would have identified with and sympathized with the third slave, the one who buried his talent. Not only would they be surprised that this 1 talent slave was banished for doing what they thought was everything right, they were puzzled that Jesus was encouraging them to be like slaves 1 and 2. So, let me explain. In the biblical times, the world was seen as a world of limited good. It was as if it was a pie. It was as if it was a box of Life cereal. There was only so much in the box, or only so much life. So, I told you about how when my brother and I would get up early on Saturday mornings and we'd race through that box of cereal, that special Saturday morning box of cereal, because we knew it just always worked out that there was an odd number of bowls in there. And I wanted to get one more than my brother. So, if I took the last bowl of cereal, Steve didn't get any. If Steve took the last bowl of cereal, I didn't get the last bowl of cereal. And the people of these times saw all the world's goods as this box of life. There's only one box. If you got a second bowl, somebody else got less. Or several somebodies got less. So, it was honorable to keep only what you had. Not to increase it. Not to give it away. But to simply maintain what you have. Increasing my amount was dishonorable. It would be frowned upon. If I increased my share, somebody else got less. So that wasn't the right thing to do. So the first hearers of this story would have heard the story and thought the third slave did what was right and what was honorable. He didn't try to take somebody else's share and add it to his box of cereal. He simply went out, buried his share, and then returned it to his master when the master came back. By the way, burying a treasure was considered the safest way to keep a treasure. According to the law, if I had a treasure and I buried it, and it was your treasure, but I was keeping it, if I buried it and it was stolen, I was not liable for it. So burying a treasure was very safe. It'd be as if we were to put it in a safe deposit box today. So what do we make of this story, this upside down world of talents and servants? I mean, how does this story speak to us some 2,000 years after the fact? And I want to go back to the Rule of 72. The third slave is not a bad man. He's careful, he's cautious, he's prudent. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if slave 1 and slave 2, if they'd invested whatever they invested their monies into, and they lost it all. Jesus doesn't tell the story that way, but I don't think the master would have been harsh with them. In fact, I think and wonder if the master wouldn't have even applauded those efforts. And here's why I think that. I don't think this story is about using the Rule of 72 to double the money. I think this parable is talking about so much more than money. It's about investing more than money. It's about taking risks. And I think the story is about how the disciples are to live when Jesus is gone. In other words, I think the story is about what it means to be a follower of Jesus and what it means to be faithful to him. Ultimately, it's about you and me. I wonder if this parable isn't telling us that the greatest risk of all is not to risk anything. To not care deeply enough about something, not to care so deeply that you're willing to invest deeply. I wonder if Jesus isn't saying here that the greatest risk is to play it safe and to live a life of fear. The third slave, he doesn't squander his talent. He doesn't go out and use his talent for riotous living. He returns it in full to his master. Why? I think it's because that third slave was living a life of fear. He was afraid. If this third slave is afraid, then his mistake is not in failing to trust the markets and whatever investments he might make financially. The third slave's mistake was to not trust the master. He even says, I knew you to be a harsh man. That's his mistake. He doesn't know the master. And how do I know that? Because remember, I think he would have seen the master's true character with what he trusted him with that talent. Remember, the master has given him $1 million. It's a tremendous amount of money. The master was very generous with all three of his slaves. He trusted them a great deal. He trusted them with millions of dollars. And I think, what does it mean to live with the gifts that God has entrusted to us? And I think that's the question that Jesus is asking in this parable. God has provided God's people with talents that allow us not only to survive, but to thrive and to flourish. How will we receive those gifts? Will we receive those gifts with fear? Or will we receive those gifts with faith? I do think the day will come when God will make an accounting for our gifts, but I don't think God is looking for a return on investment. Markets can be volatile. They can be fickle. I think what God is looking for is for people who trust and don't fear. Repeatedly we hear in the Bible, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I heard once that the phrase, do not be afraid, can be found in the Bible 365 times. In other words, once for every day of the year. Do not be afraid. Our mission is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. This is our life-giving treasure. We can bury this great good news of God's love for us and for all like a treasure hidden in a field. Or we can take the bounty of our talents and without fear share that abundance with everyone. Thanks be to God. Amen.